All right, I just wanted to go over this sheet here after you've worked on it in groups. Up at the top, I used highlighter for the sections that I thought we should be able to figure out what they mean, and I underlined in red the areas that I don't think we've talked about yet that maybe you had question marks by. All right, under Article 3, Section 1, in the yellow up there, it says the judicial powers of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court. This is the start of our federal court system. Remember, we did not have a federal court system under the Articles of Confederation, so this is just saying here that we now have a Supreme Court. Now, we know that the federal court system also has district courts, 94 of them, and 13 circuit appeals courts. And so the next line that says such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish is just saying that Congress can decide if we need lower courts, and we know that they have. In orange under Section 1, it says the judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior. This is just saying that all of our federal court judges hold their job for life. This is their lifetime term. But it is also saying that they can be impeached if they commit a crime. Underlined in red is a section that we just haven't talked about, but I don't think it's hard for you to understand. It just says that our judges will be paid. Just like we had sections in the Constitution for the senators and reps and for the president. They all receive a payment for their job of working for the government. Now under Article 3, Section 2, shown in green here on our page, is just a long list of all the cases that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction on. There's a long list. I just highlighted in green the areas that we had talked about in class. You see there it says the judicial powers shall extend to all cases arising under this Constitution and the laws of the United States. And then after skipping some areas, it also says, and to controversies between two or more states. We had said that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction on cases that deal with the Constitution, federal law, or anytime two states are in disagreement on federal law. This is seen in Article 3, Section 2. The other areas that I did not highlight are just very specific, and for our high school government class, we don't need to get that specific on those. I do want to discuss this section here that you probably didn't understand that I underlined in red that said certain cases the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction on. The main two types I underlined are cases dealing with ambassadors, and the reason the Supreme Court would have original jurisdiction here, and what that means is they would hear the case first, so they would be the only court that would hear it, is if we have an ambassador from another country who has done something wrong, we want to get the case heard quickly, and if they're guilty, get them out of our country and back to their home country. And the second type, it says, is cases where states shall be party, and we don't want to have a case where a state is involved go back to their state district court because that court could be biased. So anytime states are involved, we're going to take it right to the Supreme Court. And then I probably should have read the section in yellow before I did the underlined part there. It just says that all the cases in green up above, the Supreme Court will have appellate jurisdiction in, which we discussed yesterday, meaning they will hear it second when the case is brought to them, if they decide to hear it. The final section that is highlighted in orange says the trial of all crimes shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crime shall have been committed. This just means that any trial that is a crime, a criminal case, will be held in the district courts, which are held in the states where they were committed. Just saying that most of the Supreme Court's cases are going to be civil cases where they're arguing about how the case was handled or someone's rights. Usually, and as it says here, trials with crimes will be held in the district courts. The final section here, Article 3, Section 3, I underlined all in red because we haven't talked about treason yet. It just says here that treason will consist of levying war against the nation or to giving aid and comfort to the enemies. What this is saying mainly is that you cannot be tried with treason for your freedom of speech, to speak out against the country. The next part says, no person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act in court. This just means you can't have evidence that, could be, debatable that proves you committed treason. You need eyewitness testimony to prove someone committed treason, and it has to be two eyewitnesses, so it can't just be a he said, she said. The final part says that when someone commits treason, there can be no attainder of treason with corruption of blood. And what corruption of blood means is if someone in your family commits treason, the other members of the family cannot be punished. You are not a treasoner because your father's blood runs through your veins and he committed treason. Your blood is not corrupted by the treasoner. So that's the first part of the assignment. Now what the assignment would like for you to do is think about the other sections of the Constitution we've read and what things do you not see in Article 3. And there's quite a bit because it's such a short section. If you think back on Article 1 and Article 2, they talked about how members of government were chosen, their qualifications, how many people were in each branch, their term, their roles and jobs, when they would meet, when they would take office. They talked about their powers and duties, how often they met, if they got paid, and some of that is not seen in Article 3. Now, the term is seen, we just talked about, and getting paid is talked about, and there is some information on their jurisdiction. How they are chosen is actually shown in Article 2 under the president because he is the one that appoints them and then the Senate approves them. But there are no qualifications listed for members of the Supreme Court or any of the federal courts. And that's because there are none. The only qualification to be a Supreme Court judge is that the president chooses you and the Senate confirms you. So in actuality, if Joe Biden came in here and chose one of you to be a Supreme Court judge, as long as the Senate would confirm you, that would be perfectly all right. Now, we would expect our president to pick somebody who is qualified and knows the law, and we would expect our Senate to approve somebody only if they were so. But there are no qualifications listed in the Constitution for this branch. There is also nothing said about how many Supreme Court justices we should have. That's why the number has changed throughout history and is currently at 9, but it's also why a president like Franklin Roosevelt was able to discuss possibly packing the court and raising the number up to 16. This may have been done since Congress is allowed to add lower courts, and we currently have 94, but that number could go up if Congress decides to. And the current number of 13 circuits in the Court of Appeals could also go up, depending on Congress's wishes. There is also nothing listed in the Constitution about when the Supreme Court will meet. The government passed a law that said the Supreme Court begins each year on the first Monday in October, and they meet until their caseload is done. They usually take a break in the summer and convene again back in October. And the final area that really doesn't have as much detail as the other branches are the jobs or the powers of the Supreme Court. Even though it lists their jurisdiction as appellate on most cases and original on some, it doesn't say what they do in those cases. And that's why the rest of today we're going to spend looking at the first important Supreme Court case that established the power of judicial review, which is what the Supreme Court uses to declare laws unconstitutional. The case of Marbury versus Madison. This landmark case established that the Supreme Court's main job was to look at laws and interpret whether they were constitutional. And that is still what the Supreme Court's main job is today.